First item on our agenda, prior to approval of the agenda, is just a welcome back to everyone. It's September, and today's one of those days where it started off cold and got warmer towards the end, which is not usual for September, so I'm welcoming it. It's good to see everybody back again, and as we'll get to later, we're coming to the end of our term here on SEAC, so we do have a few items to discuss, but I don't think we'll be running overtime tonight, that's for sure. So first item on the agenda, I would like to get approval of the agenda. Anyone raising that? Thank you, Leah. Seconded. Sophia, thank you. Any questions or comments on the agenda? Seeing none, all in favor, show of hands, please. All opposed? So carried. Thank you. That looks unanimous. I would just like to point out we do have a couple of new faces. Trustee Chowdhury from Milton has replaced Trustee Graves. So he's our new trustee rep. Welcome aboard. Thanks for coming out tonight. And I'd also like to recognize we have Chair Grabench and trustee Harvey Hope in the gallery. Thanks for coming out. And Director Miller. So next on the agenda is...
Do you want Mark to introduce his staff?
Oh, yeah, please, Mark. I didn't realize. Yeah, go ahead. I know you've got some new staff, so please introduce.
Thank you. Some staff joining me as well tonight. Last spring, you met Sean Marks, our new Principal of Special Education. Also here, Sandra Hall, who... I don't know if you were here last year or not. No? Yeah, oh, you came to the June meeting. Thank you. One of our instructional program leaders, IPLs, as well as Paige Bennett, one of our IPLs as well.
Great. I see we have a fair number of people in the gallery, too. That's good to see. Next up, then, a call for notices of motion or reports to the board. Are there any? No, seeing none. Moving on to our action items. First up is discussion and approval of the minutes from our June 5th meeting. May I get a firster on that? A mover? Thank you, Leah. A second? Lucille, thank you. Any questions or comments on the meeting minutes from June 5th as published? Seeing none, can I see a vote? All in favor? Any opposed? No. So that's unanimous. Thank you. Next on our agenda is current SEAC conclusion and new SEAC. Just briefly, as I said, originally we are coming to the end of our term on SEAC. Lorna had sent out the meeting schedule. We do have 3 meetings left. And then this current SEAC at this point is dissolved. And with the new Board of Trustees coming in, we will then reconvene the SEAC in January. Did you have more to say on that, Mark, or do you want me to continue to talk about it? Okay. So some of you I know are new. Some of you it's your first day. So basically how that works is the reps and alternates from the various associations effectively reapply as you did originally, and will be, I'm assuming, approved by the Board of Trustees to rejoin SEAC. The members at large, which is Lucille, Denise, Nassif, and myself, we do need to reapply, and there is an application process for the 3 member at large positions. The new SEAC will convene in January. There'll be some introduction, this is how SEAC works, and so on. Of course, for those of you that have already spent time on SEAC, that'll be just a refresher. And for any new members or reps that we have, it'll be a chance to learn how SEAC works and start getting used to the terminology and so on that we use here. I understand that it's Halton, right? Halton Down Society, or is it Autism Ontario? Autism Ontario has put out a request to their membership to look for a new SEAC rep. So hopefully we will have...
Carla has stepped down.
Yeah, so Carla Marshall has stepped down and they're looking for a new person. So any questions on that? I would also like to recognize Trustee Gray from, you're from Halton Hills, right? Yeah, welcome. Thanks for coming out tonight. Next up is the Oakville Secondary Gifted Boundary change. And for that, are you ready to go, Mark?
I am, thank you.
Yeah, over to you then, please.
So this was shared with SEAC members last night, and I apologize that this came to you so late, but it couldn't come to you any sooner because I needed to share it at admin council yesterday first. So that's why you're seeing it last night for the first time. So this is something that is a matter of us trying to adjust student enrollments across 3 schools that have the secondary gifted program in them in Oakville, looking at the programming options for those students, trying to ensure that we have equitable program options across the 3 schools, also trying to look at the accommodation pressures that we're facing as we continue to grow as a school board with some heavy growth in Oakville, and trying to address those issues. So when you look at, if you've had a chance to read the background, you can see the sort of the backstory of this. So trying to get rid of the.
Yeah, no, you don't want them completely off, Jason. I'm just trying to get rid of that vibration. Look, like that. Would you prefer this? Yeah. Yes?
Yeah. Great, thanks, Stuart. Finally, someone that can work the lights. We'll tell Scott. That's right. So for some of the backstory, if you look at the second page of the report, I appreciate for those in the audience, this may be a bit hard to see. I'll increase our size a bit. And hopefully you can see here on screen our high schools in Oakville. And so drawing your attention to this first column, the shaded column here, especially down here at the, these are the numbers, the enrollment numbers for students in the secondary gifted program. So you can see Abbey Park at 240, the Ridge at 94, and Oakville Trafalgar at 51. Quite an imbalance there. The challenge is being, especially at Oakville Trafalgar with those small numbers at 51, reduces the options there for students in terms of grouping them, the number of courses that can be offered becomes challenging. On the other side of the equation, if you look further up the chart, up here at the enrollments, I'll draw your attention first, if you look at Abbey Park, over here at the OTG, that's a ministry term for the on-the-ground capacity. The OTG for Abbey Park is 873 students. You can see that next year, the school is projected to be over 1,400. So that's a real pressure there on the school. There's no more ability to put more portables on the site. The town of Oakville has said you're at your max. According to their building department. So the school really is tapped out. And the challenge there when you have a school really over capacity is it starts to limit the program options on the other side, where you can only run so many gym classes because there's only so many time slots to get into the gym. There's only so many times in science labs, in the music rooms, etc. So those pressures start to have impacts on the other end for students and their program options. And if you look at as you project forward, those pressures will stay quite high for quite a while. And what this doesn't show is some of the ongoing projected growth in Oakville, because some of it's just unknown to the planning department. But any of you that have driven along Dundas, as you enter into Oakville, you know that it's going to be all growth north of Dundas from, I don't know where you'd start, basically as you hit Oakville, all the way over to 9th line. We already know where there's going to be 6 elements from Malaga all the way across. So 55,000. There you go. So lots and lots of kids. I think we have six elementary schools planned just on the east side of the hospital. Is that right, Stuart? I think.
Yeah.
So real growth coming there as well. We'll be ready for that, but it's as the accommodation pressures continue to mount. So that's the current state of the numbers. If we go down and look at the map, and I'll change the size here again for you so we can see more of it. Here are the current boundaries for the self-contained gifted programs in Oakville. So if you're saying, wow, why is Abbey Park so large? And that's because these were set over a decade ago, and when Oakville was much smaller, and the self-contained the secondary gifted program was much smaller, and so the numbers were quite balanced at the time when these boundaries were set. But now you can see it's quite a big swath, and certainly contributes to the imbalance of those gifted numbers and the accommodation pressures at Abbey Park. So that's the current state. So moving along, here are the proposed adjustments. And I should point out on the previous chart, but I'll point out here, at the top of the table are the 3 schools, and it shows you what schools are included, or what other boundaries, I guess I should say, are included in that new boundary. So here you see for Abbey Park gifted, it would include the Abbey Park English boundary and the Garth Webb English boundary. Iroquois Ridge gifted is the Ridges English boundary and the White Oaks English boundary. And then for Oakville Trafalgar, you have the OT English and the Blakelock English. So I'm showing you that so that you're aware that as cohorts of kids go in neighborhoods, we're not splitting kids. That all the kids that would attend the OT boundary or English area, for example, all those same kids are going, if you're in gifted, all those same neighbors and kids, all, if they choose gifted, are going to that same school, etc. for the others as well. So we're careful not to split cohorts of kids that way. Then take a look at the numbers here. And what you need to do here is look ahead, because with this boundary change, it would start for grade 9s only. We're not going to shift all the 9 to 12 next year. We would start just with the 9s. So you need to look a good 4 years ahead to see the impact of the change. So if you look forward to 2022, look now at the gifted numbers down here. 159, 153, 159, 127 at the gifted placement numbers under the year 2022. So a lot better balance there. And then when we talked before about the school going over 1,400, you can see up here on the upper part of the graph, or the chart, that the numbers stay lower and actually drop down below 1,300 as we move along. So this will help both program balance across the 3 schools, where they have more balanced numbers, more equity of program options across the 3 schools, and we're reducing some of the accommodation pressure at Abbey Park. So then if you look at the new boundary map, the revised boundary map, I'll change my size again here. So you can see here that the adjustment that's been made. So all this, and this is a boundary that we have for many of our schools in Oakville, is the QEW. So that boundary now becomes the boundary for Oakville Trafalgar for gifted. Abbey Parks sits up here. This is 16 Mile Creek, isn't it? This line here. And then the one that you're probably saying, wow, isn't that pretty big, the Ridge? Yes, that's quite a large swath that Iroquois Ridge now has. However, we have plans for another high school north of Dundas. It's at Dundas and Niagawa. Is that where, Stuart? So we're in process right now around the land and working with the town on all of that work. And so we have plans for a new high school up there. And with the growth of the population and the growth of the self-contained gifted program, the secondary gifted program, we anticipate that we may open a fourth program. So when that looks like a big swath of land there for the ridge, we may very well in time open up another program. So that's why it looks big, but there's the potential for it to be subdivided again in the future.
And I would add, in that area, in that blue, north of Highway 5, we've also got planned 6 elementary schools. So, and those 6 elementary schools would essentially all feed into the new high school, although not all of them. One of them might go down to Iroquois Ridge or something.
So that's these are the proposed changes. I did, because of the impact specifically on gifted students, prior to this meeting, that's why we were coming in just right at the bell. Staff and I did meet with Sherry and Dawn from ABC to spend some time speaking with them about that and ask more detailed questions that they had around gifted students and the impact there. We talked about communication and those kinds of things. The timing of this, why I'm bringing this to you tonight, is because in October, we send the information letters home to grade 8 parents of gifted students across the whole board, telling them which their designated schools are for gifted for grade 9. And then the information sessions that each high school hosts about all their programs, including gifted, occur in November. So we want to bring this to you tonight, bring it to trustees as well, hopefully at the next meeting if we don't anticipate much change here, so that we can move ahead with preparing all those materials and that communication for schools in October and November. So that's the quick version of the report. And if anyone has any questions or suggestions, I welcome them.
Okay, speakers list is open. Trustee Chowdhury, did you manage to log in successfully?
Yes.
Okay, good. So Trustee Collard, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Having just been through the PAR process in Burlington and seeing how we tried to make a balanced set of schools in what sometimes can be a geographically challenging area, I'm a little bit perplexed when I look at the population of the various schools in Oakville. Some of these are still going to be bursting at the seams, most of them actually, and I'm a little bit concerned that we may end up being in the position of changing boundaries for high schools in Oakville to find a little bit better fit. So if that were to happen, and the fact that you've lined up the gifted with existing school boundaries, would that then impact the gifted at the same time, so that if, let's say, the boundaries for Garth Webb changed, then that would change in the same way for the gifted placement?
Great question. Thanks, Amy. So as you know, the boundary process that we do for schools doesn't stipulate or I guess necessarily impact special education programs, right? We've intentionally kept that out of the boundary process. So any changes that might occur would happen through the Student Services Department. And we would certainly look, and we do this each time boundaries change for schools, we certainly look at what are the special education programs impacted by those boundary changes, and does it make sense to make other adjustments? So for example, if the Abbey Park boundary were to shift in whatever way, and we said, yeah, that makes sense to also shift the gifted, that might happen. So
My concern, as always, is keeping the cohorts together. So when they come from the feeder schools, that they will remain with their classmates, because that's always a difficult transition to high school, especially if you're not going to the high school that would have been in your neighborhood. So that's always a consideration for me. I'm also curious if we will entertain optional attendance for families that have multiple siblings in the program, where one would be at one high school and another potentially would be directed to a different high school.
Thanks for that. Yeah, and our practice has been, and I would anticipate to be the same here, where when we start to implement this, where you're right, potentially a family of a grade 9 student is now being directed to a different school and transported there, and yet their oldest sibling is still at the other. Certainly, the families can indicate that they want their children to be together, and we've accommodated that in the past, and would plan to do that again. So, because we're quite sensitive to that, and that's important.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on this presentation? No? Okay, seeing none, we move on to next item in the agenda, which is the summer board update, and that is also from Superintendent Zonnefeld.
Thank you, Jason. So I thought there were a few things that SEAC would want to hear in terms of activities that the board has gone on, specifically to do with students with special needs. So I'm going to start by talking about our assistive technology learning that has occurred this summer, because we have quite a great uptake that goes on there. And so I'll share this brief slideshow with you. What you're seeing here on the left is one of our AT camps for students. I'm not sure what school this is in, but you can see some pretty engaged kids there, and they're learning around their assistive technology. And on the right there, you can also see image from the teacher and educator learning, because we've got quite a bit of that going on. Lots of teachers really keen to make sure they're keeping up with their technology skills as well to support their students. So we've got a brief video here. This is around some of the teacher learning, and we're going to see if the sound works. We hope. Let's see. Oh, we got some sound. Can you hear that?
We're using HP Reveal, which is a type of augmented reality where you can do things like hold a phone or iPad over a kid's piece of work, and then a video or image will pop up of the student explaining their work and talking about it. Well, I think it's important as the world moves onward that the kids are able to keep up with it, teachers as well. Technology is just evolving more and more over time, especially in the last 20 years. And it's important for kids to have those learning skills, that sort of open learning to be able to keep up with modern new technology. So a lot of it is also them being aware of media, knowing what's real and what's not so real, which is increasingly important today in news outlets and other things like that.
For the students, we want them to have a variety of tools that will provide strategies for the different tasks. So the different tools for different tasks that will help build engagement, independence, and student achievement. We're also looking at the importance of digital citizenship and looking at the global competencies as well. We want the teachers to be able to provide a whole host of tools that students have to choose from depending on the task, so that there's a level of independence and engagement which will in turn help improve achievement. We're looking at teachers recognizing the tools that will support different learning profiles and being able to engage those students to take the risk and have the self-confidence to learn something new.
So that's just a quick look at some of the educator learning going on. And this is not letting me go on to my next slide. Why is that? Sorry, here we go again. So the AT camps for kids have different themes each year. And this year the theme was where the wild things are. So pretty engaging. You can see obviously a real wild animal theme here. There's a lot of content. I can actually give you a link to this slideshow. If you go and dig further into these links here, there's all the content of the student learning that went on through these camps. Give you a sense of the sort of the magnitude of this. You can see we had 297 registrations. You can see the range of grades across here, mostly focused in the junior grades, but right from 1 to 8. 27 camps, 74 students across 74 schools participating. And we had a number of volunteer hours put in. I think we had 4 high school students helping out in these camps. And so you can see 203 volunteer hours there as well. So just so that some of the numbers around those. Also available this summer, we had our Educate Family. This is an online program where parents can learn about the hardware and software that is available for students, the assistive technology devices and software, and then how to use those and how to support their children at home. So that was also fairly well attended or participated in by parents. And then we had a course offered for grade 8 students entering into grade 9 for learning AT skills as well. And once again, this link takes you into quite a bit of information there, but I won't go there now. And this was offered at Robert Bateman this past year. So that's a look at some of the AT learning that went on this summer. And I also thought I would share with you an example of the physical renovations that have gone on. So this one here is a video of Emmett Robinson High School right next door to us, and shows you some of the before, during, and after by the end of the summer, the changes that have gone on. So I'll let you take a look at this, and I'll do a little voiceover so you can see some of the. Most of you know that there's a CPP, a Community Pathways Program at MMR, and there's some. You can see some of the renovations that went on there, as well as, if you recall, I think it was in June or May or June, I shared with you designs for the outdoor classroom area that we were designing and then going to build that would be accessible and a real focus for our CPP students. You'll see some of that as well. So here we go. This is the front foyer currently, and this was a design focus to bring in the Canadian flag and the theme around Lester B. Pearson into this, designed around the theater entrance. Still in the front foyer, some of the design and change to make it a more welcoming student environment. Some of the outdoor of the building, people thought needed a real facelift. You can see some of the staining and things that had difficulty removing and keeping away, and now the new cladding that's gone on the outside to really freshen up the outside facing, the entranceway. Redoing some of the overhang out front. Now here's the CPP area. You can see the previous, what some of the classrooms looked like. And now the renovation work in motion. They've blown out that door to make that more open to the hallway. Don't mind the mess. put up some new walls, and now you can see some of the new spaces. Real improvement. You can see some new private areas. This is a new teaching washroom. You have students working on life skills together there. New accessible washroom for students as well. Here's the outdoor spaces, not completed yet. And I'm going to pause this for a moment. Sorry. If you recall, in the presentation that I shared in the spring, we talked about things like areas where students can have some physical activity and work on things like balance and agility, flexibility, those kinds of things, but also that some of the design elements that you saw, the construction and design classes in the school, those teachers are really keen to be able to help out and have their students design and build the elements that are going to be added here. So our outdoor architect is doing all the design work so that we know that's safe and accessible and all those things for our students. But our technology classes are going to be building these and then installing them. Perhaps some of them in the fall, others in the spring. But we really like that because of the sense of ownership that comes with that as well for other students. So you can see those things there. So those are some of the footings that will come. What you don't see on that outdoor space there also in the previous designs were plantings. So the plantings, as you can imagine, aren't there yet. Some of them will come all through a number of these areas around the outside of this oval, and on the inside there are plans for some appropriate natural greenery in there as well. Here you can see old lockers, process old lockers. Here are the new ones. Old lockers out, new ones in. All that work has gone on as well. So these aren't all the changes that happened at MMR, but captured sort of a nice summary of them, and I like the way that this really highlighted the areas of the CPP for you to see as well. As you can see, I'm a West Wing fan, and those are there also. So that's my summer update. Any questions there before I go on to some of the ministry update?
I just have one short question, and then we'll go down the list from there. On that outdoor play area, recreation area at MMR, I saw there was some, look like sections of logs standing vertically. How are those anchored? Are they in concrete or somehow reinforced so they're stable?
Yeah, I couldn't say for sure what they're in, but I can tell you that we have done that repeatedly in other outdoor classrooms and other schools, and have contracted architects that specialize in outdoor learning and play areas for our kids. And so those go really deep in the ground, and we've had those for a number of years in other schools. So, we're quite confident that they're quite strong and stable.
Good, thank you. Next is Trustee Chowdhury.
Great, thank you for that informative update. The question I have is based on discussions I've had with parents in Milton who constantly ask me, are there programs, in particular computer programs or online training that the school board offers? So you mentioned in one of your slides that parents whose kids go to the summer camps then themselves can also enroll in some sort of educate program. Did I see that correctly?
Yes, that program is available, but it's not limited to the students that participate in the AT camps. So any parents with students that use assistive technology could participate in that program.
That specific program is offered only in the summer?
I believe we only offer it in the summer. I'm going to look back to staff. As you can see the nods, yes.
Okay, great, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Sophia.
So I was super excited when I saw the flyer for the Assistive Technology Camp, and in fact, I shared that with a lot of our families who inquired. And unfortunately, we were told that our kids with Down syndrome, were not eligible, even though they all have assistive tech. Most of them have SEAC claims, but because they need support, that we don't have the funding and they're not eligible. So, of course, the families that I shared this were pretty upset with me, like, oh, what happened? Why are we not? Why are our kids? It doesn't seem like it's inclusive. And so I had promised, okay, when this comes up, I'm going to bring this up as an issue and find out, well, what are we going to do to be more inclusive and allow the other kids to also have a camp? Because studies do show that assistive technology is amazing for all kids with special needs.
I would totally agree with you. I'm sorry, I don't know the exact profile of students that are supported in the camps. I know that we are limited to I guess the extent of students' needs in terms of their ability to accommodate them, but I will certainly look at, can we expand that so we can include more students in that? I couldn't tell you the details of
Well, we were told sort of unofficially any child that would need extra, like an EA support would not be eligible, but there's always creative thinking. We could share EAs or, we have a lot of respite funding that our kids get. So. Right. We really, some of the families got together and we talked about it, and a lot of people felt like it wasn't inclusive, and it sort of defeats the purpose of, inclusion and HDA. We really support that in Halton, and so. Yeah. And so out of curiosity, where's the funding coming for a camp like that?
So just very fair comments. I will take that back in terms of how we can support more students in the camps. The funding for that comes through a ministry grant. The ministry provides funding to all boards and for assistive technology specifically for students. So within that grant, boards are able to spend those dollars on student learning and staff learning and parent learning. Mm-hmm. So it's within that grant.
Okay. Because a lot of our kids do have iPads, Chromebooks. They have all the devices, but I think one of the challenges that several families have mentioned is that the kids are not learning how to use a lot of these apps. So we're not really leveraging the technology. And so when I saw this, I'm like, oh, perfect, we're going to do it now. Yeah. So I'm hoping for next year I'd be happy to help, but if we could definitely look at, making it more inclusive.
Yeah, thanks for that feedback.
Yeah, thanks.
A good question, Sophia. Thank you. Would it be appropriate to put the follow-up on that to next month's agenda? Would you have time to prepare that for then?
I will see. How about I'll get back to you when we're working on the agenda. Just in fairness, I'm sure you can appreciate that staff are pretty focused on startup with students, helping students transition in and making sure that supports are in place. So I would hesitate to say absolutely yes when our next meeting is really only 3 weeks away, right? With this being the second meeting of the month. So if possible, yes. If not, then soon afterwards.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Next up, Denise.
Refresh my memory. Is there a kitchen for culinary arts going into MMR?
Are you talking in general in the school or?
In the school. So the reason I'm asking is, excuse me, one of the great things that Bateman has done with their LEAP program is they have a garden that they then harvest from the garden and create in the kitchen recipes and various things. They've also donated their extra fruits and vegetables to organizations around Burlington, and which is a really cool learning experience for the LEAP kids and as well for the CPP kids to be able to kind of have that experience of not only growing the food, but then taking the food and making it to their table. So I couldn't remember if there was a kitchen going, like a production kitchen where they can actually cook in going into MMR. And if so, would there be an opportunity to put that sort of a garden into the space? I don't know, that exact space or some space, because it's a really cool life skill for them to learn.
Thanks for that question. The renovation at MMR is in 2 phases. So what you saw on screen now was phase 1, that we wanted to get that work done right away to support our students. Phase 2 is there's a number of parts of the school as well in phase 2, but one of those is the new cafetorium. So There's an addition being put on the back of the school to accommodate that, which is going to accommodate a food school program, which currently doesn't exist, and would allow for what you're describing as well. So I couldn't say for sure if the home garden part will be there, especially as it first gets going, but we're certainly learning from each other's programs across the schools and bringing that into as many programs as we can.
Thank you. I think it's really key that, particularly moving the LEAP program over there, that the LEAP profile of the kids, and I know it's not a special education program, but most of those kids are on IEPs, which means they fall under our purview then.
Yep.
That experience of being able to go into the kitchen is not only a good life skill, but it gives them that opportunity to move around, because many of those students struggle sitting in a chair learning. So I'm glad to hear that that's going to be something that'll be going in at MMR.
Thank you, Denise. Just a follow-on question. I won't actually put myself on the list. Do you have an approximate date for that phase 2 construction at MMR?
I'm going to look to Director Miller. Do you know the plan is for it to be next summer, correct?
Yeah, the design work's happening now, and then there'll be preparatory work in the spring, and then hopefully it'll all be completed during the summer. So the plan should be nothing failing, including tariffs and so on, by September of next year.
Great, thank you. That's good news. Next up, Tammy.
Follow-up from the summer tech classes for families. Was already mentioned that Educate Family was free for parents for kids in the program. How or where can we direct families that weren't in the program to access that tool?
Great question. I don't know if I have the answer back here, or I'll get it to you. But sorry, you heard Judy Sackville on one of the videos, who's here presenting tonight, that has run all those this summer. So I'll be sure to check with Jackie and get back to you, or Judy, sorry.
You all done, Tammy? Any other questions for Mark on that presentation? No, well, thank you, Mark. That's good to see that all that activity fit in this summer. Next on Act 3 of the Mark Zonnefeld Show, it's the provincial ministry update. So back over to you, Mark.
So when we're planning the agenda, we thought we'd touch on some things that we're hearing from the ministry, because I'm sure that you're aware of some of those in the news as well, and thought it would be good for SEAC to hear directly. So I'm going to start by talking about some of the math work that's happening. You may have heard the ministry talk about a focus on going back to the fundamentals. And so some clarity for you that the ministry has not issued a new math curriculum. So the curriculum is the same, and the ministry has asked staff to focus on specific areas in working with our students this year. So all of the areas of the curriculum remain, and staff are expected to follow that curriculum. It's just some of the focus that they've asked us to put on fundamental learning and teaching and learning. So they have issued this document, which is available on the ministry website. You can see it's a parent's guide for what those areas are. Once again, nothing new here. These are the same content, same practices that were there before. Also a guide for teachers that's been drafted for a support to teachers. The ministry has also asked boards to designate a professional development day, professional activity day to math learning for teachers, and is asking that boards use the funding that was designated for, if you recall, we've reported here a number of times about the renewed math strategy, which we were focusing on students with learning disabilities. They've asked us to use dollars there to do many of the things that we're already doing in the renewed math strategy. So where we identify lead teachers and bring out teams of teachers to participate in the learning. We're glad that we can continue with our RMS work, Renewed Math Strategy work. We can add in some of this focus on fundamentals, but we can also maintain our focus on students with learning disabilities and improving, teachers' ability to meet the needs of those students. So that's where the funding is coming from for this. So it's not new funding. It's just a request on the ministry's part that we use the funding in certain ways with a fundamental math focus. So that's what's happening on the math side of things. On the health and physical education side, I'm going to talk about, I've got a letter here that has come from Director Miller to teachers. And to clarify for them thank you. Okay. A letter to teachers around the expectations that the ministry has articulated around health and physical education. So you can see for secondary schools, there is no change that teachers will continue to use the 2015 curriculum. In elementary schools, that teachers will use the 2010 curriculum, which they've just reissued to us, and our program department has developed a comparison of the two, so teachers can understand the difference. And in the end, the main content of what's being taught really hasn't changed much. It's more about the examples and some of the teaching strategies that teachers are using that the ministry has asked us to take a different approach. But the main content hasn't changed that much. Also, we've asked staff to be aware of the Human Rights Code and that the importance that we're supporting all students and that all students feel valued and accepted in our schools, regardless of things like gender, identity, etc., and family makeup, those kinds of things. So that's the main highlights I would mention there in terms of health and physical education. And finally, the last thing I'll mention is that the ministry has been talking about a consultation process. So this is once again on the ministry's website where they're highlighting the areas that they're going to be consulting on in the coming months around science and technology and math, jobs, job skills, how to improve graduation rates, important life skills, etc., the health and phys ed, standardized testing, even a possible cell phone ban in the classroom. They're looking for consultation on that. So we don't have any more information than that at this point, but I would anticipate that they'd be seeking input certainly from parents, potentially from school boards on these areas, and as information becomes available, we'll certainly share that with you. So those are the three main ministry areas I'm touching upon tonight, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mark. Up first, Diane Vanden Bosch.
Mark, an awful lot of these ministry directives or documents that are coming out are just absolutely ringing alarm bells for me. And I can see that our students with learning disabilities are not going to be successful. Because if the fundamentals of math include learning math facts, it's not going to happen. Because our students don't learn math facts. They learn how to get to the answer, but they don't learn what 6 + 7 is. Not being able to use a cell phone in the classroom, when how much of their technology is on the cell phone. So I see huge difficulties for our students with learning disabilities with an awful lot of these directives that are coming out. And it really does show me that the premier and the person that is responsible for the Ministry of Education don't have a clue what happens in our schools.
Thanks for sharing your concerns, Diane. Please be assured that our staff are continue to be focused on meeting the needs of all students. We are bound legally to follow the directives of the Ministry of Education. Have no intention of not doing that. And at the same time, we'll look after our most vulnerable kids. So please be assured that staff will maintain that focus on their needs as well. Stuart, you want to add?
Is it okay, Jason? And I would just add to Mark, these are not really directives at this point. I think the ministry is putting these in as a stopgap. I think it's important in the consultation phase, because they say they're going to consult with parents, that they hear from all parents. They hear from parents of kids, parents of students with challenges, students of parents of students with special needs, parents of students who have economic challenges, and all those other things. It is one of the challenges, but I want to reiterate what Mark said, and I'll use health and physical education as an example. We have every intention to ensure the safety of our kids around some of those things that were in the 2015 curriculum. And we believe the 2010 curriculum allows enough flexibility for us to do that, as an example. So.
Anything else, Diane? Good, thank you. Good comment, thank you. Next, Trustee Reynolds.
Thank you. Just to build on that point about the public consultation, I would urge and encourage actually all the members of SEAC to participate in the parent consultation. One of the things that trustees are advocating for to the ministry currently right now is that they ensure they have a diversity of voices. So I would encourage you all to take this opportunity when you have it, to give feedback on these areas. I appreciate your voices, and I'm sure they will too. But we certainly need to encourage everybody to participate. I do have a question, and it's regarding the health and physical education. I'm wondering if you could clarify, please. We're getting a lot of questions from parents who have been reading in the papers, on the media, about what this exactly looks like. And I appreciate that you've shared out the differences in the curriculum, but people would love to go to the source documents. And I'm just wondering, has our board or our teachers have available to them, if parents should ask, here's what it looks like, here's what it looks like currently, and here's what we're delivering, so that they can, in fact, be comfortable with what we're sharing.
Thanks for your question. So that, in fact, is what has come from the director in this letter to staff, so that they have access to the appropriate curriculum documents. So here you can see continues with 2015 for secondary. Here's the 2010, here's the link for the 2010 for elementary teachers. So we've given that access, and then I know the program department was working on the comparison. Do you know if that's been issued yet, Stuart?
No, it hasn't been issued yet. But.
Yeah, and we have asked teachers, that I guess to be sensitive around both the needs of students and the direction from the ministry. And teachers have choices around when to cover various content throughout the course of the year. So we've asked them to stay away from those more sensitive areas to start, to be sure that they're clear on what it is they are teaching to start the year. And just so you know, if students ask questions, teachers aren't going to say, I can't answer that. They're still going to respond, support students, to make sure that they understand. The whole intent of the health curriculum is to make sure that students are well versed in a variety of issues, so that they can make informed decisions and maintain a healthy lifestyle, as they mature. So, we've been very clear with teachers. There's nothing that you can't discuss that students might, inquire about. Stuart,
and I would just add that when the 2015 curriculum was rolled out, there was opposition to it and challenges to it. And we rolled it out in a systematic way, as did most boards. Those areas which are considered the most contentious by the government or whoever, generally the majority of them generally come in the spring, April, May, June. We think that the government will be finished with consultations and we'll have more clarification by that time. So as Mark said, we've said, teach the curriculum as it is right now, because there's a lot of similarities between the 2010 curriculum and the 2015 curriculum, particularly in the physical education as a component of it. So we're hoping that we'll have more clarification for people, for parents and our teachers as we get into the new year.
Thank you. Anything further, Leah? That puts me up next. I realize this is not really a soapbox forum, but I have to agree completely with all the issues that Diane raised, and I do have a couple of questions myself. I've got to admit a little bit of confusion. As I recall, when this was originally announced by the ministry, there was a rollback in the curriculum, and a snitch line was to be set up for people to snitch on any teachers that deviated from the curriculum. And I'm not sure if that snitch line is still in place, and I'm having a little trouble reconciling that, and I may be out of date on that versus what we're hearing here, because the talk at the time was you've got to stick to the curriculum, no exceptions, anything else, and you're in trouble with whomever's answering the phone there. And I'm trying to reconcile that with what I see in Director Miller's letter talking about human rights, because the two are so far out of sync. I mean, they're not even in the same province. I can foresee situations where kids are dealing with a home life situation of perhaps gay parents or whatever the case may be, and they can't even talk about it at school. They can't even raise that question, and their teacher's not allowed to talk about it. So is that what was, or is that what's going to happen, or what is currently happening in those grades? That, a child, for example, a child of lesbian parents, for example, can't even talk about it in class without the concern that their teacher's going to end up on the hook with this snitch line.
I can address that, Jason. We're not sure if that's not what they called it, but for, the so-called snitch line, we're not sure if it's going to happen. The government did have a little bit of backtracking on that. And as you know, Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario has included that in a request for an injunction on the new sex ed curriculum. That's what they called it, but it's physical and health education curriculum, and on that snitch line. So that's going to navigate through the courts somehow. I don't know how. But as for the second part of your question, absolutely, teachers have the ability to talk about those issues with kids. They should speak about those kids. My expectation as director would be that they speak about those kids. I think the Ontario College of Teachers their expectation would be that teachers address those kinds of concerns from students, because we also follow a professional code of conduct. And are we supporting students that come to us with these challenges and just say, well, it's not in the curriculum? It's not, as Mark was saying, it's not as explicit in the curriculum, but teachers have flexibility and room in the probes they can use and the examples they can use. And there is an expectation that if a student comes to you with a question, a concern, you need to address it. The addressing might be, I'll have to get a CYC or a social worker or something like that. That might be the addressing of it. But it's a good question, and I think it's one of the things that our teachers are wrestling with as well. So we put this letter out to try to give them some guidance. I and some of the senior staff, superintendents, we met with the presidents of the unions yesterday, and we're working together to try to provide clarification so that staff feel this. Having said all that, if someone doesn't like it and there is a snitch line, they can phone it in. And I think that's what people are concerned around. And you even mentioned, Jason, it's the government even put parameters that the snitch line is around deviation from the curriculum. One of the concerns of the unions, and I think of boards too, is that it'll be used for a whole bunch of other reasons as well. So I hope that answers your question. But you're right, there's a lot of gray right now. But we think that our teachers are professional enough that kids in need, whatever that is, will be supported.
Yeah, thank you, Director Miller. And I would just add to that, thank you for that clarification. I think we're on the same page with that. And I think that part of the concern that I need to voice whenever there's a change in curriculum, particularly something that is has this short a runway from here's the rules and school starts in a week kind of thing, is that the emphasis and the focus is always on the bulk of the student body. And it's those kids, for lack of a better definition, that are not identified as part of that large bulk, whether they're gifted, learning LD kids, whatever their particular needs are in school, they always lag. It's just natural. And they're going to be at the tail end of the whip when this sort of stuff comes through, because by the time it's filtered down to them, it's going to be changing again. And particularly for an issue like math fundamentals that is so important to any child's education, concerns, obviously, and I hope other people share my view on this, that it's those kids with LDs and so on that are going to have the hardest time, because they're going to be seeing probably two rapid succession changes much closer together than the rest of the student population, and similarly be at a greater disadvantage with adapting to those changes. So I'd like to urge you to keep that in mind with your planning and rollout of these changes. That's it for me. Diane, did you have a further question? Go ahead.
I just have a tremendous concern that going back to the health and phys ed curriculum, our reality today is that there are homes with two mummies or two daddies. And we don't refer to it as a lesbian household or a gay household. That child's family happens to have two moms or two dads. And I don't think it should surface as a concern. And yet, that's what we're being forced to do through the directions that are coming from the ministry. That's our kids' reality today. And it's normal for them. And when they come to school in grade 1 and grade 2, and all of a sudden they're being told that their normal is not normal, what are we doing to their self-esteem? What are we doing to their concept of family? I have huge concerns.
Thank you, Diane. Over to you, Sophia.
Just want to add a little bit to what Dr. Miller was saying. I'm a teacher librarian in a middle school, and so I buy most of the books for our library collection. I will tell you, we have a diverse population with kids that are gender neutral, some of them. Our books represent our kids and the families. And so after this update from the ministry, we're not going to get rid of all those books. Those books are there. And as teachers, we talk about, kids are going to ask us, we're going to answer those questions. So we do, like you said, we have a lot of flexibility. The curriculum expectations are there, but there's a lot of flexibility with how we can teach the content. And so we will continue to represent our families and our students, and the family makeups are all different. We have guidance counselors, full-time guidance counselors that are there to help. So I think the media, as always with everything, they blow things out of proportion, but the reality is on the ground in our schools, we're pretty good about representing all of our kids, their best interests.
Great, thank you, Sophia. Any further questions or comments on this subject? No? All right, thank you, Mark, for that very informative. Next on the agenda are questions from the public. There are forms for that, but I don't think I've ever seen one filled out. Do we have anyone in the gallery that has a question? Seeing none. Next is 5.0, SEAC discussion and question period. So the speakers list is open. And first is Denise.
Mark, my question is for you. So when a student is in, so this is in secondary, a student is in CPP or any other programming and they want to move, say, into an essentials program, into an essentials course in English or math, or even into applied, is there an assessment? Let's say the teacher has recommended that they move in, that they have the abilities to be able to go to those courses, which we want our children to work up to their abilities. Is there an assessment they have to do before they can be allowed to go into those courses?
No, there isn't a specific assessment that must be done to get into a certain program. Each students and their abilities would be considered as individuals. So,
all right, so now I have an issue. So I have a student who was moving up, wanted to move up into applied, and they were told they had to do an assessment. The assessment was a story that this is for English. The story was very disturbing. It was about, they had to read a story. It was about a young boy who was stabbed, and the story is the process of him dying. And people coming around and not realizing that he's dying. And then the student had to answer questions on how could you make that person feel better because they're dying. Okay, I really don't think the story is appropriate. And I didn't think there was an assessment, but this was tagged as an assessment that had to be passed before the student could go into applied English. So.
English or philosophy?
It's not a good situation. Anyway, so I just wanted, I don't know if it falls under student services or if it falls under programming, but the story to me was inappropriate. And then having the student have to go through this assessment on the first day of school to decide if they can go into applied English was all kind of not in the best interest of the student.
So based on what you've described, I appreciate your concern. And I hope you can also appreciate that we don't know the whole story here,
I can
right?
tell you the whole
story. But I also know that you know that here at SEAC we don't talk about specific kids or schools or staff.
This is a process that they use. So this is not a one-off situation. If it was a one-off, I wouldn't be bringing it. I was told this is the process that is used to move students when they want to upgrade from section to section. So that's why I brought it here, because I suspect that it's being used with other students, even though I only have one example of it at the time. But that's what it was being told to me as this is the assessment and the process that we have to go through in order for that child to be moved up.
So I haven't heard of that before. I'd be glad to talk to you about this afterwards. I'm looking to staff if you have any. Staff are shaking their heads saying that's news to them as well. So okay. I'd be happy to talk with you about that afterwards.
Diane, Van Bosch, go ahead, please.
Questions for Mark. I realize that we won't have numbers regarding identifications or summary of identifications until the end of October, but I'm wondering if there has been any movement on the number of students who are on non-identified IEPs.
So yeah, you know that our numbers all come from our October 31st count. So it takes staff a while, some time to generate and pull all those together. So if we can have that together for you by our November meeting, I'm not sure which date, what our date is in November, but if we can, I'll share those at our November meeting. Otherwise, we can bring them to you in the new year. It's on the 4th. So maybe by then, but if I can, I will.
It's a comment that I heard this week, that a parent had requested an IPRC, and the request wasn't being refused, but the principal was certainly putting up an awful lot of roadblocks, such as, are you sure you want to do this? It's not necessary. It's a real nuisance. And if you identify them now, next year you change your mind, you want them unidentified, you have to go to an IPRC again. And you don't need to do this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when parents are requesting to go to IPRC, there seems to be an awful lot of stonewalling happening.
So yeah, as we've discussed before, that's certainly the parent's right to request an IPRC, and should be supported, and both in terms of the request and the process by the principal. Most principals would be probing to understand, because ideally, if there are concerns that could be addressed immediately, and therefore they don't need to move through that process unnecessarily, that they would want to do that. But if it is the parent's wish to move forward with an IPRC, that should certainly be supported. So if you've shared that advice and support with that family, Diane, that's great. Or if you want to talk to me afterwards further, we can do that.
Anything further, Diane? Okay. Next is Sherry Foster.
Thanks, Jason. So I just want to follow on what Diane just asked, because those exact same issues come to me more often than they should. And you know that because I send them to you. So, and we just had another one recently in the last couple of weeks where it was the exact same thing. The parents requested IPRC in the last school year. Stonewall, delay, didn't happen. Oh, you didn't get the IPRC. Guess you got to come back to our school. Yeah, we'll try next year, get you in. So it's not the first time that it's come to me and I've sent them to you. Diane's also bringing it up. What can we do across our system to help our principals and admin and cert staff understand that requests need to be respected, and this shouldn't happen over and over and over again? I wish I didn't have to keep bringing it up, but it's all of us that are keep bringing it up. So, what's the issue and how can we fix it?
Thanks. It's a very fair question and fair concern. We work really hard at good communication with our administrators and our certs and self-contained teachers. We do that through, certainly written and online resources, but also learning opportunities and networking opportunities that we provide. Those were voluntary 2 years ago, and last year I made all of those mandatory for staff to attend because we were seeing gaps in knowledge and understanding. So that's an effort on our part to really ensure that that messaging is out there. We do have some challenge, partly just in terms of staff turnover. right? That when we have new administrators and new certs, teachers, et cetera, that they do need to get up to speed in terms of that learning. But we do work hard at that. I'm looking at Paige in the back, who organizes and facilitates great learning for elementary certs and self-contained teachers. And, they do a variety of topics throughout the year, but certainly part of that is legislation, understanding all the expectations around identification processes, which would include the ability for parents to make requests. So that's included as part of all that learning. And I wish I could sit here and promise you this will never happen again, but we all know we're talking about people and processes that aren't perfect that way. So I can tell you that we're constantly working at this, constantly reinforcing messages and understanding in hopes that these things don't happen. I also appreciate that many of these are unique stories, even though I know it feels, and what you hear is one story. I'm thinking about the last one that you and I spoke about. As we dug into that some more and understood the full story, there were a lot of elements to that where it wasn't as sort of black and white as a request was made, it was missed, and here we are. There was quite a bit more to it. We worked all that through, and the students started in that school and all that. But that's a part of what we do, is try to make sure we really understand the situation and are able to support kids and families with that knowledge.
Is that all, Sherry? Okay, thank you. Next is Sophia. Go ahead, please.
I've recently heard from several families that have expressed concerns over EA shortages and cuts at their children's schools. My own son's school, they went from having 8 EAs last year to 5.5 this year, while their number of children that need support has remained the same. My concern is that EAs are being stretched because they're still supporting that many kids, but there's few EAs now to do that. Ultimately, EAs are burning out and kids are not being supported the way they should be. So my question, I have a 3-part question. First is, how is EA allocation determined? When and how is it decided that cuts will be made? And how does the redistribution process work?
Thanks for your question. So first, so you know, trustees approved an increase in the number of EAs for this year over last year, commensurate with our projected student enrollment growth. So no increase, I guess you could equate to a reduction in number, right? Because our population grew, but our staff complement didn't. Just so you understand that growth occurred in the staff complement. Secondly, we shared here last year that we were using a new online allocation tool to help us better allocate EAs in terms of student needs, really understanding those needs in that process, and being more accurate in terms of the data around what those student needs look like. So things like, how often do they need toileting support? How many staff are required for that? If they're requiring support coming and going from the bus, the transportation, what does that look like? Those kinds of things that we're just trying to gather that much more detail and understand the time needed for that kind of support in each school to ensure we get the right amount of support there. So that's all gathered by staff. That happens all through the spring. It's quite an involved process. And then we work through with principals in establishing those allocations so we can staff for the fall. Come the fall time, as happens every year, the students that we determine the allocation around for that school aren't necessarily there come September. Sometimes they've moved, new students have come in, needs have changed over the summer in terms of students' development and things going on with them. So the next step in that process is our staff then checking in with schools to say, okay, so are those students there or not? Who's new in your school? What needs have changed in what ways? All those questions are really dug into to understand the needs in schools. And I know that staff are meeting, I think this Friday, to bring all that back and say, so did the allocations that we put out in the spring, based on what we knew about the needs in schools, do they now match the needs of schools? So that work is going on. Plus, we know that, and you know this as a teacher, that what we see going on in that first week or two and what appear to be, wow, this is a real need, can look quite different a few weeks later. That there are transition things that happen, students settling in. If we went and adjusted our staffing based on the first few days of school, we wouldn't have the right staff where they should be 3 weeks later. So you need to wait for some of those things to settle and kids to come back in and get back into routines to really know where the needs are. So that goes on as well. And then staff are looking at that carefully to say, are the staff where they should be? And in some cases, we've got it right. And so the allocation is as it should be. Sometimes we need to do a shift because that student is now moved over here, so that EA should shift and bring that support over. Sometimes we should be adding to schools. Sometimes we are taking away. So all that goes on. Plus those EAs that were brought in the spring, we're bringing in through the budget. We're bringing those in as well into the mix of the allocation to be able to support new needs as well, because we always have new needs come into the system that we need to be able to respond to. So all of that goes on, and so I know it can feel like to some schools and to some parents like, wow, there's not enough support here. Mm-hmm. And there might not be in some schools because of those changes that have occurred. Mm-hmm. So we're really looking at that carefully. We've got two IPLs here who are out in schools every day these weeks, really asking those questions and then coming together to redistribute as needed.
Yeah, just like I'm on the parent council too, so we do hear a lot of the stories. Parents come back and they're sharing, what's happening. Parents know that I was in the council last year, so they come to me with their concerns. And so a lot of parents have said, my kid had, they were supported 100% last year. Now they're supported 50%. Their needs haven't changed. Their class sizes are larger. Like, what's going on? Why is that happening? So I was surprised where cuts that large, like you're taking 2.5 EAs away from a school where the needs have actually probably gone up. And then EAs are stretched, and they're stressed out. And then it's a trickle down. And because I'm an educator as well, I know what it's like then on the teacher. EA is stressed out. You're not supported with the EA. Then then the child feels they're not fully included. They're not supported. So it's a trickle down effect. And so I was really concerned about why are these cuts happening and what that looks like.
And yeah, I appreciate all that. And one other part of this to keep in mind is that all of us want our children, our students, to ultimately be independent, right, or as independent as possible. So that's constantly the eye on the horizon that we have in our planning of program, of determining supports for students, is how do we work towards that goal of independence. So I know it can feel for parents that, okay, so why is that allocation changed? And in many cases, what's actually happened is that student may have started with X amount of support last September, but the staff have been working with that student, and slowly, in many cases, that support has been reduced and independence increased through the course of that previous school year. So now we're coming into the next school year, and sometimes the parent's comparison is back to last September, when really let's look back at last June and say, wow, he or she is that much more independent and able now to start with this level of support, which is really where we want to keep going, mm-hmm. right? So it's also that
the concern is more around implementing the IEP. So if we're to truly implement the goals on an IEP, a teacher in a classroom with 29 kids is unable to do that realistically, because I'm a parent and I'm a teacher. So when I switch hats and I think of myself as a teacher, I have 29 kids in my room, how am I going to help this child truly implement that legal document, which is his IEP? There's no way I can do that on my own, right?
We recognize there are challenges for sure with some of those situations. So we're trying to get the staffing allocation right, really support teachers with strong certs that can come in and do that work as well, because we want to see that child flourish in every class.
Great, thank you, Sophia. Next, Trustee Collard.
Thank you. This is just a follow-up to Denise's question about the assessment for students that want to go from CPP to Essentials or from Essentials to Applied. If your finding is ultimately that such an assessment does occur and that it is happening throughout the system, could I ask that that be added to the special education plan, because it's not there right now, and if that is our practice, it should be reflected in the plan.
Certainly, Janice and I will talk further. If this is something that is occurring and expected, then we'll dig into that further. And as anything should be, that if it is a expected practice in our system, it should be reflected in the plan.
Anything further, Amy? Okay. I have a question regarding the new school messenger system. First, I'm glad to see it's there. It looks like it's going to be a good improvement. But concerned about how long does it take when someone fills out the form to when they're activated, and what sort of confirmation do they get to say, okay, you're now in the system and should be receiving messages?
I'm sorry, I'm not that familiar with it to be able to say, but well, I can get you an answer. Hopefully the timeline isn't too long. I'm hearing about parents using it quite a bit, and already the feedback has been very positive. So it shouldn't be too quick, or sorry, it shouldn't take too long. The volume of time in terms of the signups at the beginning of this year, because it is so new, may be a bit of a lag, but hopefully not too long. But I can find out for you.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions during the question period? Seeing none, we move on to 6.0 on the agenda, and superintendent's report.
You have to be tired of me by now.
This is scene 2, act 4.
Yes. I'll keep this quick. So I shared my report with you last night, and I kept this pretty brief. We talked about the things I was going to talk about in terms of startup. I think we've talked about in terms of staffing and support and that kind of thing. So, but overall, we've had a good start. We've had quite a bit of training that's in motion or getting going right away for staff. You can see I've mentioned those there around BMS and around our managing violent and aggressive behavior and procedure. And then I thought I should also highlight our structured learning pilot, which you heard a lot about last year, knowing that this is going into year 2. And it started last January, you will recall, because it didn't get approved until late, in last June within the budget. So we needed that startup time. But just to highlight that our focus is really around continuing the great work that's happening there, and with an eye on evaluation of the pilot, because it's incumbent on us to report back to trustees in the spring to say, here's how the pilot's gone. Here's the successes, the things we've learned, and our recommendations going forward. So that'll be coming, but that evaluation will be a focus within that pilot this year. And I'll stop there.
Great, thank you, Mark.
And take any questions if you have any.
Okay, moving on then to association reports. Do we have any? Seeing none. Trustee reports. Do we have trustee reports? Who is first? Michelle? Go ahead, please, Trustee Baker.
Okay, so over the summer we had 2 special meetings. The first was to deal with our EDCs, Education Development Charges. Our bylaw at that time had expired, so we needed to get a new one in place. And I was hoping Director Miller would still be here, but we actually had a time lapse between the old one expiring and the new one being set up. So financially, it was quite a burden on the board. The second meeting had to do with the, sorry? Well, we did get the new one. We did pass the new bylaw, yes. The second meeting on July 25th was the interview and application for our new trustee, Trustee Aldi Chaudhry, which I'm sure you welcomed today. And then our first meeting of the year was on September the 5th, and we had the oath and swearing in for our student trustees, Connor Clark and Kevin Ming, as well as our trustee-elect Ali Chaudhry. And so at the board meeting, we had a motion come forward regarding student expense accounts, which will come back to the board at the first meeting in October. And we also had the 2018-2019 LTAP school boundary review, which is coming back to the board on September the 19th. And then the trustees were voted to send correspondence to the Ministry of Education regarding consultations. And I think that's it for me. Is anybody else?
Thank you, Michelle. Oh, pardon me. I've got too many things on the go all of a sudden. Go ahead, please, Trustee Reynolds.
Thank you. I just want to put on people's radar, PIC registration. Oh, this might be a cost. I'm sorry. Well, I'm here. I just got the notice that you can register for the Parent Information Conference October 13th. I apologize to the committee member here. That's really great. Please send it out to all your family groups. It's a free event. It includes lots of great seminars, free babysitting. You have to register for it, and it's at Garth Webb High School. So please, and the guest keynote speaker is Amber Mack. So I hope to see everybody there.
Great, thank you, Leah. Amy, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify regarding the question about the EDC bylaw. We didn't pass the new one. We were permitted to extend the old one. So we continue to take a daily hit on our EDCs. We're not getting what we requested. We're going forward for another year with the old amount. And we haven't yet worked out how we proceed forward after that, or if we're allowed to proceed before that, and what all the pieces of the puzzle are. So yeah, it's a little bit more complicated, and we lose money every day.
Sorry, and just a point of clarification. When you say lose money, you just bring in less than was originally anticipated in the budget?
Yes, but the EDC bylaw is designed so that we break even at the end of the day. And so by not allowing us to collect what we asked for, we're not able to purchase land as the price of land continues to escalate. So we do lose money.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Next up are
that for the period from the time of the end of the old expiry date to the enforcement of the new bylaw, we will lose approximately $635,000.
Thank you. Next, committees and other reports, starting with PIC. Got anything left to throw in there?
Yes, you should. Just wondered, Denise, did you get, I think they sent letters out beginning of September. Did you get one?
I did. I forwarded it on to Jason.
Okay. Are we going to try to do, I'm not looking after the displays this year, so I might actually see some of the conference. Are we going to have a table this year?
Sure.
I know you ended up doing all the work last year, and that would be a big thing if some other people would help you out.
Yeah, but that doesn't happen very often, so.
So
yeah, I'll reread that and do whatever we need to do to get ourselves a table.
13th? No.
It's the week after.
Yeah, I'll have to check. I
13th of October?
May not actually be available on that day, but I will look into it. And if necessary, appoint a volunteer.
Yeah. Well, and hopefully I can do some of it. I just couldn't last year because I couldn't get away from all the other tables that I
Yeah,
was
no, I appreciate
minding,
it.
so.
Yeah, thank you, Don. Next, Accessibility Coordinating Committee.
Trustee Harvey Hope is the.
Go ahead, Trustee Hope.
Hi. I happen to be the trustee rep on that particular committee. We had a meeting in August, and we talked, all the different departments are on track for getting their work in place. And we also went over the admin procedure for the accessibility planning admin procedure. And one of the things we talked about was, it uses acronyms. So SEAC is in there, and maybe people should know what that is. And also the word consult versus share and those kinds of things. So we sort of gave them some feedback, and they're working on that. And that, so we have another meeting in October, and things like everything seems to be on track so far.
Great, thank you. Special Education Review. Oh, and it's got music.
Apparently it has music. So the good news is that it has been approved to do phase 3 of the special education review. We had a meeting, which I unfortunately missed, so I'm hoping Mark will update on what is happening with the steering committee.
Sure. Thanks, Denise. So the steering committee met last week, and we spent a lot of time talking about the work that's gone on so far and what we learned through the review about where we might go next and what those questions are. And the main questions, I think, were around early identification, the value of that, of really understanding kids and their profiles, and how best to do that, when to do that, those kinds of things, which I know is a question near and dear to the hearts of LDH. And then the other was questions around our growing cohort of students that have an IEP but are not identified. And so we didn't determine an end point yet for this next phase of the review. First, we want to understand more about that early identification bank of knowledge there. There's quite a bit of literature out there and understanding about it. And so we've asked the reviewer that's where first to dig. That's is to really understand based on exceptionality, based on age, based on when best to intervene and support students, to dig into that knowledge bank first. And then from there, based on the outcomes of that, then to talk about where next within the review. So we're anticipating probably the next month or two would be the time frame when we meet monthly, but probably 2 months to hear back from the reviewer around that information, and then we'll determine next steps.
Thank you, Mark. Next is Equity and Inclusive Education Advisory Steering Committee. Go ahead, Diane.
We haven't had a meeting yet. We have one coming up in October, and I do believe we are joining the Halton PD workshop around equity.
Sure.
Maybe it's one that you're attending and we're going with you.
Oh, are you talking about the Halton Equity Symposium that's being hosted?
Yes.
Yes. So Halton is hosting a symposium on equity, not just for our board, but for other boards as well. So that's a new event for us. That is on November 4th. Oh, thank you. December 4th.
No, November 4th?
December
4th.
Yeah. So.
Okay. We must have a meeting before that. Okay. Thank you. And I will get back to you with the date with our next meeting because we must have a meeting before then.
Okay, thank you, Diane. Next is the working together document. I believe that's you. Is it Sherry? Or am I wrong on that? Not anymore? That's over to Mark then.
So we did some work on this in the summer, and I wasn't able to attend the end of that work. So I'm looking at Sean. Do we have more to share at this point? Or I know we've done a chunk of work on it that we're going to bring to you. Is there more to say than that? So we will come here. How about, thanks. So we will come here in October, if we can put this on the October agenda, to bring some of the work that we've done with that. A lot of the working together content is stipulated by the ministry, right? Because the ministry has this expectation for that all boards provide this kind of document, so that parents have access to this information. And so as we spend a chunk of time at the beginning investigating the documents from other boards, with thinking that we don't have to reinvent the wheel with our tune-up, and much of the content is identical, because once again there's a guide. The ministry actually has a guide on, and so a lot of boards have just cut and paste the information right in there. So we've done some work looking at formatting, but also how to make it more parent-friendly in terms of some language, some layout, etc. So we will bring that to SEAC in October for your input. Certainly don't want that going out into the final version without you looking at it.
Great, thank you, Mark. Last on the list of reports, MMR LVP, or Lester B. Pearson integration update. There is to be a follow-up lessons learned, what could we do different type meeting on with this committee. It's supposed to be in October, but I don't have the date yet. So I will bring whatever I have. If it's not for our October meeting, it'll be our November meeting to let you know how that all wrapped up. That brings us to item 7.0, next agenda and order paper. Looks like the agenda for October, we've already got 2 items there. Working together update from Mark, and also some information from Mark on Bill 191, which is support for fetal alcohol syndrome affected children under special education. But Mark wanted to talk about the dates as well.
Yeah, so you may have noticed that when we put the dates out for October, for the rest of the year, that October wasn't on the first Tuesday of the year. And that was a request from me because I had a conflict that was laid out for me last spring. But in the last few weeks, that conflict has been canceled for me. So we could shift back to the first Tuesday of October, which I believe is the 2nd. Is that right? So I put that offer out there because I think in the past when we've changed the Tuesday of the month, it's been a conflict for some of you because you've had other commitments. So I'm fine with keeping it on the 9th if you've already locked in other things around that. Or if you want to stick to our routine of first Tuesday of the month, we can set it on October 2nd. Does anyone have a preference?
I would prefer the 2nd.
Second. So we'll make that shift then. So if you could mark your calendars, we'll make the change on the board calendar. I apologize for the date change, but my calendar did open up on the 2nd. So, okay, so we'll make that change. And then one other thing I should mention is when we were at our last agenda meeting looking at the dates and determining that we did need to go December and January without meetings because of the dissolution of SEAC and the time to form the new one. I went back and looked at the reg that says that we need to meet 10 times a year as a SEAC. So I believe that we currently will have 9, I think, 9 meetings because we doubled up in April around budget, which we've done for the last number of years. So we need to add one more meeting. So I'm not suggesting we pick the date here, but as a group, that'll take us another hour. So I'm not suggesting that, but maybe looking for if there's any input around when it might be best to place that additional meeting, and then we can determine that in our next agenda meeting. I think Amy's.
Go ahead, please.
In the last 2 terms, the January meeting, although it's not a SEAC meeting, is a PD session, and it counted as a SEAC meeting because all of the new SEAC met, including the new trustees on SEAC, to have the PD. So that's how it was worked the last 3, because I was on SEAC before becoming a trustee as well. That's what we did.
Thanks, Amy. That's great thinking, that we have done a sort of a training and orientation for new SEAC members. Thank you.
Yeah.
So that would be in February, I think, because we're
that's in January, because we just don't do it the first Tuesday of January. We do it towards the end of January, so that it gives trustees a time to constitute who will be the members at large and the representatives of the associations.
Right.
Yeah.
So how about if let's, because I think I'll have to work with the new chair and co-chair to see how quickly we move in terms of, all the standing committees and chair trustee appointments, et cetera. So if we can tee that up for the end of January would be great, because that would be our 10th. Thanks for that, Amy. So if you could hold a Tuesday, maybe the 3rd or 4th Tuesday in January in your calendars, if you're, I guess, number one, if you're planning to return. I know that may not be the case for everybody, but you might want to mark that in your calendars, because if we can, we'll make that a SEAC orientation session, which will count as a meeting. Well, there's 5 weeks in January. 5 Tuesdays in January. How convenient that is. Yeah, so that does work. Yeah. So we'll look at one of those possible dates as our 10th meeting. Thanks.
Yeah, go ahead, please, Sherry.
Thanks. I just had a question back in the last section about PIC. I was just thinking about communicating the conference to our members, but our members are more than just HDSB PIC family. So is PIC for everybody, even though it's an HDSB event?
It is actually for HDSB. Occasionally there are a few people that come from other boards, but how it's funded and everything, we had this discussion after the last one, is the funding part, and it's free, and so that's paying for the food and all the supplies and the rentals.
It makes it hard for us to communicate that to our members.
Yeah.
Because well, you can come, but you can't.
But the Catholic board has stuff we can't go to.
Okay.
So I guess just sharing it that way.
Okay.
Yeah. And the stuff does end up, a lot of it does end up online. So our non-HDSB members might be able to then go online and, because they usually film some of the speakers, and that stuff will be on the HDSB website.
Any further questions or comment? No. So that moves us on to 8.0, but it's not yet 9 o'clock. So here's what I did this summer. Yeah. No, it's we've been through a lot of material already this evening, and we've been good at staying on the agenda, so that is excellent. So I would ask for someone to raise a motion to adjourn. Diane, a seconder. Trustee Chowdhury. All in favor, show of hands, please. Any opposed? Seeing none, so carried. Thanks very much, everyone, and we will see you in a few weeks.